Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello and welcome to Reflections from Torch Trust, the programme that focuses on faith and disability in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker, and I'm so pleased you've joined me for the next half hour. Something we often talk about on Reflections is how God sees us as whole people rather than defining us by just one part of who we are. Recently, producer Linn Davies published an article for Pure magazine entitled "When Faith Forgets You're a Person." A very poignant title, isn't it? In it, she shares her personal experience of having unwanted prayer for healing forced on her after asking for prayer for her terminally ill mum. Here she is in conversation with Torch's CEO, Sarah Dawkins.
Today, I have the honour and privilege of turning the tables on Linn. Often, listeners of Reflections will know that Linn is the one asking the questions and getting to know things about other people. But today, I have the honour of asking her about an article that she's recently written for Pure 24/7's magazine, when her article is called "When Faith Forgets You're a Person." So welcome, Linn. Tell us a little bit more about your article.
Thank you, Sarah. So the article came from an experience I had in 2010 when my mum was suffering from cancer. She was terminally ill. At the point where this happened, it was just predicted that she had a few weeks to live. And in fact, she only lived for 5 weeks after this whole thing happened. So what happened was my friend's mum had also died very unexpectedly. I think it was either a traffic accident or some kind of acute heart problem. I can't remember, but it was like a very, very sudden death. And we were at her wake, and it was kind of one of these very loud sort of African wakes where people sing a lot of very happy sounding worship songs because it's all about celebrating life. And then the pastor was saying that if anybody would like any prayer for anything, come up. And I am not usually the person who will go up for prayer because I don't like that sort of attention. And in my experience, if I go up for prayer, there's only one thing people think I need prayer about, and that is my eyesight. But obviously my mom was in the situation she was, and all I wanted was for her to have peace, and I was in a very different kind of state of mind to what I normally am. And I went up and I said to the pastor that I would like you to pray for my mom, and I explained the situation, and he started praying for her to have peace. And I thought, everything is going really well. And then all of a sudden he just stopped and he was like, "What's wrong with your eyes?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm blind." And I just thought, that's the end of that. But then he started putting his hand on my eyes and started praying for me. And I felt so shell-shocked that, why is he doing that? I didn't ask him to pray for that. So I was just standing there, almost unable to say anything. And then when he was done, he was like, "Oh, Jesus will give you sight. I just know it. I can hear the Lord say it, and amen," and all that. And I was like, right, I didn't come for this. But I just remembered quietly turning away and leaving. And I felt, I don't like using this word, but I almost felt a bit violated because I had come there to pray for someone that I love and that I really care for, who needed it much more than me, in my opinion.
I mean, that's such a horrible story, Linn. And just even as a sighted person, the thought of somebody putting their hands on my eyes, just that part of the story alone does, I think, violated makes sense. That's not how we treat each other's bodies, is it? It's not an acceptable thing. But actually what you said in terms of the bigger thing there is that you had a real prayer request, a real thing, and something that was causing you a lot of pain, and it was ignored because this person thought they knew better, because they noticed your eyesight and they decided that that was your biggest problem.
Yeah, and I think it sort of reinforced why I never ever go for prayer requests in any kind of church service.
Yeah, which is really sad, and for you that's the consequence of this one person's actions. I mean, how did it end? Did you get a chance to talk to this guy at all?
I never did because it wasn't a pastor and a church that I regularly saw or
Mhm.
had any kind of interactions with. And I think it took me a while to kind of put thoughts into coherent patterns or words
Yeah.
for what had happened because I was just really confused and I was a lot younger then. I was also in that time of my life coming to terms with being blind. And I know that sounds very strange because I'm born blind, but I have since heard that many people who are born blind get to one of these breakdown periods where they then have to kind of re-accept the fact that they're blind, even if they've always been blind. So I also couldn't make sense of that. And I think that added to all the other agony that I was going through. So I never really addressed it with anyone or talked to anyone about it. But the experience has stayed with me. And I've had experiences, I mean, only a few months later, I remember there was another pastor who said to me that the reason you're blind is your fault because you don't have enough faith.
Wow.
So that was another thing that sort of happened to me very shortly afterwards. I think it was maybe like 6 or 7 months afterwards. And it just kind of compounded onto the other thing that happened. And I just thought, you know what, that there is no space for me in prayer circles or anything like that.
Which is just so far from the truth. But I totally understand why you feel like that. And that was the experience. Because losing a parent is a traumatic time. And in the midst of that, people were treating you really insensitively and really unkindly. And I'm sorry that was your experience, Lynn.
Thank you. And I really hope that other people haven't had the same experience because
Mm,
it can put so many people off church. It can put so many people off even exploring faith. And
yeah.
if this is the face of Christianity people are being met with, of course, they're going to be fleeing as far away as possible from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because why would you go towards something that's going to cause pain like this?
Exactly.
Um, I was really intrigued as well in terms of the article. You talked about the fact that this isn't just a church problem in lots of ways, but this is also something that's just in wider society. So you talked about 75% of blind people of working in the working age in the UK are unemployed or underemployed. That's a huge statistic.
I know. And the statistic changes with how bad your eyesight is. So the statistics that I mentioned usually kind of pertains to people who are as blind as me, which is completely blind, or just can see lights and shapes and things like that. So people who have a little bit more sight have a much higher likelihood of being employed. And I think it is because very many people can't imagine living their life without a certain sense. And
Mhm.
I'm no different from anyone else. Like, I don't know how I would live my life if my legs weren't working or if my ears weren't working. But I think because I live my life with one sense that isn't present, I know that it is possible. So, for example, I know that um, if my legs stop working tomorrow, like I don't know how I would live life, but I know that it is possible for me to find a way to live life. But I think if you've
Mm.
never had to think about that, I think many people are just thinking what they themselves would manage when or if they couldn't see, and that's kind of a bias that's sort of put onto other people.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that the pastor that we talked about at the beginning, you said he wasn't trying to be cruel, but actually it's fear. And I think the fear is true. I really loved this line that you wrote. You said, I have had two terminally ill parents. I know what it is to face something that feels unsurvivable. If the wider world genuinely believes blindness is worse than that, it is little wonder we are shut out.
Yeah.
That is really poignant. And when I first read this, I remember just going, oh, wow. Yeah, actually, are we really saying that blindness is worse than that experience? Of course not. I mean, I have the pleasure of working with you and knowing you as a person, and you have a great life. We share a love of musical theatre, and you've shown me how you get to engage with things. And it's really exciting to see how you live your life as much as any other person does. And it's, your life, I think, is full and full of joy.
Of course. I mean, I wish I wasn't blind. I'm going to be really honest and say that I never chose it and I never would choose it. But at the same time, I've got it and it's there. And
Mm,
I am not expecting to ever be able to see again, although I hope to experience some kind of artificial eyesight when AI has come really, really far.
Mm.
So, I have to just make the best of what I have, because it's what I've always had and this is what I always will have. What I think is a shame is that you have to know someone to really understand, because I've had a lot of people say similar things to what you're saying, with the preface that, before they met me, they would rather be deaf than blind. But after they met me, they'd rather be blind than deaf. And I just really think that it is a shame that it takes knowing someone to do that. And I just wish people could take things more on face value. So if I say, or if a blind person say to an employer, I can do this, there are ways around it. Like, what I would like is for questions to be asked. Oh, really? Okay, that's really interesting. How? Like, show some curiosity rather than, well, I couldn't imagine doing this blind. So like, I'm not going to take a chance on this. And I think
Yeah.
maybe I'm oversimplifying it a little bit. I'm not saying that 75% of blind people are out of work because employers are horrible. I think that's that's being really simplistic, but I do think it's at the core of it. But yeah, there was a TED talk I was listening to that I mentioned in the article where people would rather have terminal cancer than be blind. And I have seen exactly what terminal cancer do to both my parents, with chemo, starvation because you can't take in any nutrition anymore, like any nutritious, like any food, any drinks, anything. And it is awful. I just don't understand, why would people rather have pain and die than to just kind of live a happy life?
I wonder if it's a complete naivety that people don't really realize what terminal cancer means and what it looks like, and they don't realize what blindness means and what it looks like. I think when people talk about terminal cancer, sometimes they're just talking about the fact that they know their life is going to be short. They're not thinking of the suffering that goes alongside it.
And I remember with both my parents, I was glad when they died. I mean, not in the sense that I was happy, but I was glad that they didn't suffer anymore, because I'd seen the suffering they'd both been through and what it did to them psychologically and what it did to them physically. And it was like, I was almost grateful that they didn't have to endure that anymore.
No, I get that. And one of my absolute privileges is seeing how blind and partially sighted people live lives to the full. And that's one of the absolute joys of being part of Torch, is seeing that. And it takes away some of that unknown. And what I want us to be doing more is helping people to see that it isn't this really scary, life altering thing. It is in some ways, right? But it's not for the worse. As you said, it's not something you would have chosen. And yet it's something you have, and you live your life well, regardless.
Exactly. And I would actually say I think Torch does this really well, because I'm involved with other blindness organizations as a volunteer. And one of the things that I went to a conference and everyone was wearing name badges. And I know that's something we don't do in Torch, because
Yeah.
there is that philosophy of, if you want to know someone's name, talk to them. So I refused to wear my name badge and I was told off. And, they said, well, you have to wear your name badge. And I was like, why? Because I don't want people to come up and say, hi, Lynn, and then go, oh, hi, what's your name? And that's different from people saying hi, Lynn, and I'm not sure who they are. So I just have to get a reminder. But like, if you came up to me and said, hi, Lynn, and, like, it's not fair that you know my name and I don't know your name, right?
Exactly. It's not fair at all. And that's the thing. It's thinking how we do things differently that all can be included, which means we just do things that bit different. And yeah, I like the fact that we don't wear name badges, partly because I don't like it when people walk up to me and say my name and I've got no idea who they are. And then
Right.
often name badges, if they're on lanyards, they're only printed on one side, and it always seems to be the person that comes up to me and says, "Hi, Sarah." Theirs is flipped over, and I can't always see it anyway, which
That's
leaves a
typical, isn't
similar
it?
position. It's like I don't know who you are.
And
But
also,
yeah,
it's a conversation starter, isn't it? Because if
yeah,
you know someone's name, then you don't need to kind of come and ask them, who are you? What's your name? What's your job? I just think that we need to have reasons to come up and talk to people. I would say that because I'm a journalist and I just love talking to people and hearing
yeah,
people's stories and points of view. But yeah, I think not wearing name badges, it creates an equal playing field for blind and sighted people, and it gives you conversation starters.
yeah, which is really important. I mean, talking of conversations, I've loved this conversation, Lynn. Thank you so much. But I wanted to finish by just reading some more of your words, if that's okay. Because
Sure.
again, This whole article really struck me, but some of your phrases I just think have been really helpful for understanding when we're talking about healing and prayer and blindness. In your last paragraph, you said this: Jesus never approached a person and assumed he knew what they needed. He asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" That's what he said to Bartimaeus, a blind man who was more than capable of speaking for himself. That question is still the most radical thing a person of faith can offer. Not a diagnosis, not a prayer already decided before the conversation has begun, just the willingness to listen. If we're serious about modelling Christ, that is where we need to start. I think you summed it up so well there, then.
Oh, and I fully stand behind that statement, because I think that really it is the most radical thing you can do. And as Christians, I think the aim is to be like Jesus, isn't it? So, yeah, what would Jesus do? That's something I ask myself in different situations. Like, what would actually Jesus do in this situation?
Yeah. And again, I don't know if they ever happened in Norway, but as a teenager, we used to have bands that said WWJD on them, and little fabric bands that stood for "What would Jesus do?" And
I think we did.
did you have those? It's a bit of a cliche in some ways, but also, yeah, what would Jesus do? And you're right, a lot of the time he asked and then he listened to the answer, what people actually wanted. And I think that's been a really good challenge for me as I've read through this and just through this conversation with you, Linn. So thank you so much for being willing to be interviewed on the show that you produce. And you probably will also get the joy of having to edit your own conversation. But thank you, Linn, so much for sharing your thoughts and for having this conversation today.
You're very welcome, Sarah. Thank you for thoughtful questions. And thank you.
When we think about heaven, we imagine a place where everyone belongs, where every person is fully known, fully loved, and fully welcomed. While we wait for that day, perhaps we're called to reflect a little of heaven here on earth by making sure people are seen, included, and valued for who they are, not defined by a disability, a diagnosis, or any other label. Someone else who experienced hardship and rejection after losing her sight was this week's hymn writer, Helen Lamell. Here's her story, presented by Dr. Noel Tredinnick, Conductor Emeritus of the All Souls Orchestra.
The Hymn Makers, with Noel Tredinnick.
Helen Lamell was a woman born for the stage. A brilliant concert singer with a golden voice, she spent her early years performing across Europe and America. But her life of travel and applause took a heart-breaking turn when she began to lose her sight in middle age. Helen's marriage eventually collapsed during the difficult years of her failing health and eyesight. Struggling with her new reality, around 1918, a missionary friend named Lilias Trotter gave her a small gospel tract called Focused, which had been originally published in 1901. In it, Helen read these life-changing words: "Turn full of your soul's vision to Jesus, and look at Him, and a strange dimness will come over all that is apart from Him." Helen later recalled that a melody seemed to take flight in her heart, and what followed was the chorus to "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus," a song that urges the listeners to look past the things of earth that grow strangely dim in the light of the eternal. Though she lived her later years in modest circumstances and near total blindness, she remained a prolific composer, proving that even when the world fades from view, the soul can still see with perfect clarity.
The Torch Trust Hymn Makers.
Well, I'm sorry to say we're all out of time for today, but we'll be back next week with more stories and reflections. If you'd like to find out more about Torch Trust and how we can support you, our client services team would be very happy to hear from you. You can call us on 01 858 438 260. That's 01 858 438 260 or email info@torchtrust.org. We're also on social media. Just search for Torch Trust on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. So from me, Marilyn and the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.